Is Crusader Kings 3 better than Crusader Kings 2? Yes. Okay, well, review's over, everyone. Please leave a like and subscribe for more. Okay, I admit it's a bit more complicated than that, which is why I'm making this video. I actually have a lot of thoughts about the game, and in this video I'm going to be going into a lot of specific changes and additions that I do believe make Crusader Kings 3 already a better game than Crusader Kings 2, at least as far as a base game is concerned. If you're not interested in watching the whole video, here's my quick 2-minute recommendation. As someone who's been able to get review copies for Paradox games and expansions in the past, I wasn't able to this time, and as a result I bought the game with my own money. $50, US dollars that is, as far as I know, is the most expensive Paradox base game to date, yet I still think it might be one of the most worth it for a launch title. Whereas lots of other Paradox games launch with fairly basic platforms that they then build on, Crusader Kings 3, on the other hand, already has many more features than base game Crusader Kings 2, as far as I'm aware. A lot of the best features from Crusader Kings 2, including many expansion ones, are in the base game of Crusader Kings 3, and it feels like much more of a complete game than many other Paradox titles do at launch. I think Paradox has succeeded at what they set out to do. That is, making a game with as much depth as Crusader Kings 2, but easier to learn and easier to navigate. To sum it up, I would highly recommend Crusader Kings 3, especially if you wanted to get into CK2 but just couldn't get past the everything of CK2. The game is a lot of fun, and moving forward I don't see really any reason why I would go back to CK2, at least not now. Maybe a year from now I won't feel as strongly, but for right now I'm pretty comfortable saying that I think Crusader Kings 3 is just an overall improvement from 2. So that's my quick recommendation, and if that's all you wanted, then hopefully you'll find this information useful as to whether or not to buy the game for yourself. I believe it's currently on the Xbox Game Pass as well, although I don't know when that expires or the details of that. If you do decide to get the game, I hope you have fun. I know I have been having fun. As for the rest of this video, we're going to be talking about my thoughts on the game in more specifics, where I think Paradox succeeded with Crusader Kings 3, and the cases where I think they failed or at least have more to do. I'm going to split this into 7 main points, discussing features that have been changed, added, or removed coming from Crusader Kings 2. Number 1. Core systems and gameplay loop. The best thing that Crusader Kings 3 has going for it compared to Crusader Kings 2 is, in my opinion, and ironically enough, the lack of changes. The core gameplay elements that made Crusader Kings 2 fun are still there, fully intact. I'm very glad that Paradox chose to take a don't fix what isn't broken approach. Obviously, changes have been made to some core systems, like titles, claims, and the way dynasties work, for instance, cadet branches being a thing, but those mechanics more or less all work the same and lead to a lot of the same gameplay loops that made 2 so fun. The general goals for players are still pretty much the same. Grow your dynasty, work your way to other titles, marry strategically, manage your vassals, etc. The list goes on, but in general, the core mechanics are the same, and it makes it so that even with all the changes, 3 definitely feels just as Crusader Kings as 2 does. I was worried that the focus on making Crusader Kings 3 more accessible would dilute those core mechanics or make them have less depth, but that's not what Paradox has done at all, in my opinion. The game has just as much depth as Crusader Kings 2, perhaps even more, while also being more accessible and streamlined. Number 2. The roleplay system, lifestyles, perks, dynasty legacies, etc. In my opinion, the biggest and most positive addition to the game is the roleplay elements and the systems that they've added with roleplay. Obviously, Crusader Kings 2 also had a lot of RPG elements, but I think that 3 takes it to a whole new level. In Crusader Kings 2, the RPG-focused Way of Life DLC was considered by many to be one of the most important expansions, and in 3, a lot of those same mechanics are incorporated in a way that is even more complex and has much more depth than the system that CK2 had as a paid expansion. Not only are there ways to focus the efforts of your characters, but there are also multiple perk trees for each focus. The RPG elements are much more concrete and in-depth than in 2, and it now genuinely feels like your character is growing more experienced as they grow in age. Additionally, a lot of unique abilities are now unlocked by perks, meaning that you have to weigh the different options for how to focus your character. Will you be a realm-focused diplomat who can keep even the rowdiest vassal in check? Or will you become a master spy master who can fabricate blackmail fuel on any enemy? All in all, the changes here take the RPG elements of Crusader Kings and take them to a whole new level. It feels integral to the game now, and it makes role-playing your character feel natural, as opposed to feeling like a grafted-on element, which it kind of felt like sometimes in Crusader Kings 2. 3. Less annoying chores and menus. One of the biggest nuisances in playing Crusader Kings 2 is the fact that you have to micromanage so much stuff and navigate so many menus for even the simplest of things. An example would be declaring a war as a larger king or emperor, raising your vassals' armies raised each in a separate location, meaning you had to spend time grouping them all up, then hoping none would get killed on the way, or micromanaging them as they all arrived at the capital, then selecting them all and merging them, and now you can actually start the war. In 3, you can just click one button and all of your armies, as well as all of your vassals and any mercs you currently have hired, will all appear on whatever place you set as a rally point. Beyond this, when you declare war, a button appears to raise all armies, and when you end a war, a button appears to disband all armies, making going from war to peace a lot simpler and not as much of a chore. This level of streamlining has happened with other things as well. You can now have the game let you know when certain decisions can be taken again, and in general, the game feels much more navigable from a UI perspective. The tooltips are actually useful, and so is the tutorial for that matter. I know some people have said that they don't necessarily like the UI, and there are some parts I find to be a little confusing, but overall I think the game is much easier to actually play. 4. Less completely chance-based outcomes. In Crusader Kings 2, a lot of the things that could really affect your growth and progress towards goals would be completely chance-based. For instance, fabricating claims could take anywhere from a month or two to 20 years for a single claim, and I'm not even exaggerating there. You had better chances with better advisors, but still, not knowing when a claim would finish and possibly waiting for years and years or even whole characters' lifespans to get a claim made it so that a lot of times you were just waiting around. In Crusader Kings 3, these things are always just a set amount of time. It's still impacted by your counselor's skills and other things, but it's much more like EU4 in the sense that it is a set amount of time that is then affected. It makes it a lot less annoying to try to expand. No longer are the days where you might wait forever just to get a single claim while everyone else is expanding all around you. Some players may not agree that this is a good change because part of it is that you're supposed to be incentivized to get marriages for claims as well. But personally, I never liked CK2's system for fabricating claims because if you're going to have a system for fabricating claims, it should be a little more consistent. Plus, the new system still does have chance-based elements. There are chances that events could happen that could ruin or augment the jobs your advisors are working on or affect other parts of what they're doing. While I don't think that this change is a huge plus, it definitely makes the waiting part of the game more palatable and consistent. Number 5. The map, graphical style, sub-holdings, and performance. This is a fairly big grouping of diverse things, but they're all somewhat related. While I don't think everyone will necessarily like the graphical style of the game, including the 3D models for characters, I don't think anyone would disagree that the game has a fairly cohesive style to it at the very least. Personally, there's only a few minor complaints I have, such as the fact that some of the trait icons have a little too much going on for me to be able to know what they are at first glance. And even that is something that I imagine won't be a problem as I start to learn what different icons are. A small change related to graphics, but also to more general mechanics, is the fact that sub-holdings are now represented on the map, instead of being abstracted as they were in 2. This makes it much easier to see how developed a county is by looking at how many sub-holdings it has, and how many of those are built up. Additionally, it means that there are about 4 or 5 times if I had to guess, as many movable tiles on the map, which does make the strategic level of the game a bit more complex, especially when baronies will normally have more defenses and other benefits compared to cities and temples. You kind of have to think about where you're moving. Certain cities and temples might not really provide defensive benefits or might be harder to siege down versus other ones. In general, I think it's much more immersive to be able to see exactly where different places are located, And it feels much more impactful and again immersive to see where sub-holdings you own or are looking for actually are located instead of just tiles on a province overview screen. With all that being said, it makes it even more surprising how well the game actually runs. Once you get past the unfortunately long loading times to get to the main menu of the screen, there are rarely loading screens or pauses that take more than a second or two. When I first went on speed 5, I was like, holy crap, because it's so much quicker than the top speed in any other Paradox game by a long shot. Speed 5 in Crusader Kings 3, if I had to guess, is about as fast as, or rather, Speed 4 in Crusader Kings 3 is about as fast as Speed 5 on EU4. And so Speed 5 in Crusader Kings 3 is a whole new level. Optimization is definitely an area where the game seems to be just basically better than Crusader Kings 2. My gaming rig hasn't changed since I started playing Paradox games 5 or 6 years ago, and yet Crusader Kings 3 still runs better than any other game of theirs that I've played. The one minor thing is that on Iron Man mode, it seems like every 3 months in the game there are pauses, I believe to check the game state for Iron Man to make sure it's still in Iron Man mode. It gets a bit annoying when the whole game pauses for 2 or 3 seconds, and inputs can get eaten or saved sort of randomly. But beyond that, I'm very impressed by how they managed to handle everything with the game. The fact that the map is bigger, that there's more detail with all the sub-holdings, and the fact that the graphics are so much newer and cleaner compared to Crusader Kings 2, it's very surprising and impressive that the game runs better, or at least quicker, than Crusader Kings 2 does. Number 6. Culture and religion mechanics. I've grouped these two together because these two mechanics were ones that in Crusader Kings 2 never felt very well integrated into the game, and in my experience never felt like something I had much control over as far as affecting my realm. Without getting into the nitty-gritty of the mechanics, I personally think that the cultures being tied to technology makes that part of the game a bit more interesting. It makes it so if you're a ruler with a few other rulers of the same culture, all of you are sharing the same tech. And you won't have situations similar to Crusader Kings 2, where one province has tons of tech bonuses and everything around it is in the Stone Age. It makes it much more of a level playing field and much more consistent across different areas. Religion is one area where I'm not sure where I'll stand on it long term. On one hand, the religion system is very much like the Holy Fury mechanics from Crusader Kings 2, where all the religions are basically just combinations of different restrictions and abilities that in this game are called tenets. On the other hand, on one hand, it feels like there's a lot less idiosyncratic features unique to specific religions with this system. But on the other hand, the flexibility and sheer number of religions that exist in the game do lead to a lot of variety throughout the world in terms of province level variety and ruler variety and courtier variety. The fact that there are literally dozens of sects of Christianity and Islam alone lead to the diversity of the religions of the game feeling very dynamic. In one multiplayer game I did, Britain was split between Insular Christianity, Waldensianism, Norse paganism, and Catholicism in roughly equal amounts, and having that much variation is something that would never really happen in Crusader Kings 2. It also feels a lot more viable to actually convert land as a pagan if you're doing well and have a stable realm, so Catholicism doesn't always just resist conversion forever if you're trying to play as a pagan in Northern or Eastern Europe. Number 7. Combat and warfare systems. Although I've seen some people say that they don't necessarily like the new warfare and combat systems, I personally find them much easier to understand and I think they're much more intuitive than the systems that 2 had in place. The main changes from Crusader Kings 2 are that instead of 3 flanks, your army is all under the command of 1 leader, with other knights helping out and adding bonuses. Similar to retinues from 2, you can now hire men-at-arms that will help your army's quality when at war. The system has been a little simplified, with certain units countering others and certain units having bonuses on different terrain types, similar to a rock, paper, scissors style of system. But in my opinion, that's not necessarily a bad thing, and it's obviously not that simple either. The combat mechanics honestly remind me of the systems from Imperator, and in my opinion that's a good thing. Regardless of my other thoughts on Imperator, I think that game has a combat system that is pretty intuitive, but also allows for flexibility in customizing your army composition, and that's what Crusader Kings 3 system reminds me of as well. Additionally, as mentioned earlier in point number 3, the ease of actually going from declaring a war to fighting it to disbanding armies is great compared to Crusader Kings 2. I've had some people in my streams say that they preferred 2 because you could target small armies of larger countries to get a tactical advantage, but I think the overall trade-off for simplicity in 3, with armies all appearing in one place, makes it so much less of a pain to actually go from war to peace to war and so on. All it takes is a couple clicks as opposed to minutes of microing. Regarding navies and ships and transporting armies, they've also chosen to simplify things. No longer are the days of spending months waiting to group up navies and then possibly having to go transport armies. Now, ships don't really exist at all. To transport troops, you merely move them onto a sea tile like you would to a different province, and you pay an embarking fee to hire the ships, and then you move your armies as if it were land. One can dream of a day when there could be a simple Imperator-style ship combat system in the game, but until then, I think the new system of just having ships be abstracted makes transporting armies 1,000,000% easier, and I think it's basically just a good change. The last minor change I will mention here is that although the general mechanics with holdings and fort level and stuff are generally still the same as in 2, they have made holdings with any level of castle or walls be defensive, like in Europa Universalis 4, meaning that if you relieve a siege, you are considered the defender. It makes it so much more interesting because now you have ways you can fortify choke points or key locations in a meaningful way, giving you time to reinforce and repel enemies. It's much more possible to fend off attacks of much larger countries by defending in friendly, rough terrain, especially if you tailor your army around the provinces you'll be fighting in. Although others may not necessarily like the warfare system changes in the game, I personally find them to make the warfare level of the game much more easily understood, but again with largely the same core mechanics regarding how wars actually play out. That's it for specific things that I think make Crusader Kings 3 better than 2. On a more general level, regarding the amount and depth of features, here's what I have to say about 3 compared to 2. Obviously 2 had years and years, I think about 8 or 9 years, to get more features built into the game, so 3 doesn't necessarily have everything that CK2 does right now, but as far as base game, Crusader Kings 3 has so much more than CK2 base game had. Crusader Kings 3 already has a lot of the best DLC features from CK2 DLCs as part of the base game, right? Retinues, lifestyles, Viking rating. In Crusader Kings 2 base game, I'm pretty sure you couldn't even play as a Muslim ruler on release, which seems kind of crazy now with the amount of breadth of religion in Crusader Kings 3. I'm sure that 3 will also be getting features such as Merchant Republics or other things in expansions in the future, and I know that they've already confirmed that expansions are on the way. But for now, honestly, with just the release product, I think that Crusader Kings 3 is worth the money as far as grand strategy games go. I'm not a decades-long veteran of Paradox games, but I did play Hearts of Iron 4, Stellaris, and Imperator all on release, and compared to those launch products, Crusader Kings 3 is heads and shoulders above them. Since this is basically a review of sorts, I know some people might expect a number score or a star score, but personally I don't think that really captures my recommendation for a game like Crusader Kings 3 very well, so I'll just say this. Paradox has a reputation for launching base games that are somewhat incomplete, but that provide a good foundation for expansions long term. In my opinion, they've defied that stereotype here, as Crusader Kings 3 is already a very solid game on release, and I'm sure that the expansions will make it even better in the future. Beyond that, I think that on a more artistic level, Paradox set out with a few specific goals in mind. 1. To keep the depth and complexity of Crusader Kings. 2. Make it easier and more fun to play on a minute-to-minute basis. And 3. Make it easier to access as a first-time grand strategy gamer. That's my perception of their goals, and in that regard, if those really were their goals setting out, I think they succeeded to a great degree. Here's to hoping that they can do the same with other projects in the future, too. Now that we've finished the video, let me just say thank you for watching. I've put a good bit of thought and effort into writing this script and coming up with my thoughts on the game, so hopefully that shows in the quality of the video. I hope that even if you didn't necessarily agree with everything I said in it, that you can at least see where I'm coming from. It's a bit of a different style of video than what I normally do, but I thought that it was warranted with how much I've been enjoying Crusader Kings 3 and with, honestly, with how impressed I am with what Paradox has done. If you did enjoy the video, I'd really appreciate if you left a like and subscribed, as I do play Paradox games quite frequently here. Additionally, if you want to catch me streaming live, I do stream a variety of games on Twitch, including Crusader Kings 3, and a link for the Twitch should be down below in the description. And I should also have the names of my Twitch subscribers going by on screen right about now, and I'd like to give them a specific thanks for supporting the channel monetarily. Sorry for the long self-promotion, but for a video like this where I put a lot more work into it, hopefully you won't mind. Regardless, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in whatever I do next. Have fun crusading.